The road was empty, stretching endlessly through the night like a dark scar across the land. Rain poured steadily from the sky, tapping against the windshield in soft but urgent beats. The headlights of a black luxury car cut through the darkness, revealing only a few feet of road at a time before everything disappeared again into shadow. Inside the car sat a woman who was used to control. She wore expensive clothes, her hands wrapped around the steering wheel with calm precision. The car itself was a symbol of her life, smooth, powerful, protected. She had spent years building this world of comfort and distance. People listened when she spoke. Doors opened when she arrived. Problems bent and broke under her wealth. Yet tonight she was alone. Her eyes stayed fixed on the road, but her mind was elsewhere. The long day replayed in fragments. Meetings, sharp voices, decisions made without emotion. She felt tired, not in her body but somewhere deeper. A quiet emptiness followed her, as it often did, no matter how much she owned. The rain grew heavier. Then, without warning, something moved. A dark shape rushed into the beam of her headlights. There was no time to think. The impact came fast and hard. Thud. The sound jolted through the car, through her body, through her chest. She gasped as her foot slammed on the brakes. Tires screeched against the wet road, and the car skidded before finally stopping. Her heart pounded wildly, each beat loud in her ears. She froze. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. Her breath came short and shallow. Fear rose quickly, not fear for what she had hit, but fear of what this could mean for her. Her first thought came sharp and desperate. A dog. It must have been a dog, she told herself, clinging to the idea as if it could save her. Rain blurred the windows as she slowly turned her head, staring through the glass toward the road behind her. Something lay there, motionless, dark against the shining pavement. The sight made her stomach twist. For a moment she considered getting out. Her door opened just slightly, letting in the cold night air and the sound of rain. She stepped onto the road, her expensive shoes soaking instantly. Her heart beat faster as she took one careful step forward. Lightning flashed in the distance. In that brief light she saw the shape more clearly. And something was wrong. It was too large to be a dog. Too still. The way it lay on the road felt unnatural. A chill ran through her body, sharp and sudden. Her breath caught in her throat as doubt crept into her mind. No, she thought quickly. I'm imagining things. She didn't move closer. She didn't kneel. She didn't look long enough to be sure. Fear took over. Thoughts raced through her head. Police, questions, headlines, shame. Everything she had worked to protect felt suddenly fragile. Her instincts screamed one command. Leave. She stepped backward, climbed into the car, and shut the door with shaking hands. The engine started smoothly, almost too calmly. For a second, she stared straight ahead, her reflection faint in the glass. Then she drove away. The road swallowed the shape behind her. The rain washed over the place where it lay, erasing details, hiding truth. She told herself again and again, louder each time, it was just a dog. But as the car moved farther into the night, a heavy feeling settled in her chest. Something dark followed her home. Not a sound. Not a shadow. A knowing. Deep inside she felt it clearly now. Something unforgivable had happened. By morning, the city had returned to its usual rhythm. The streets hummed with traffic, the buildings glinted in the sunlight, and people moved as if nothing had changed. From the outside, her life looked perfect, neat, ordered, untouchable. Inside her home, the silence was heavier than any sound. She walked through rooms polished to perfection, the faint scent of expensive wood and fresh flowers lingering in the air. The house was beautiful, large, and carefully curated. Every object told a story of success, power, and control. Yet none of it reached her heart. She was a woman who had built a life of appearances. She had wealth, influence, and admiration, but love and warmth had always eluded her. Her marriage was distant, her husband polite, predictable, and detached. They shared a home, not a life. Meals were quiet, conversations brief and calculated. Emotion had been replaced by convenience, and comfort had become a substitute for connection. Her family praised her accomplishments, nodded at her generosity, and admired the power she wielded. But none of them asked what she wanted or how she felt. And when she tried to speak of her feelings, she quickly learned that vulnerability was not welcomed. It was a weakness, and weaknesses were to be hidden. She had always believed that money could solve anything. A problem at work? Pay someone to fix it. An obstacle in her personal life? Hire a consultant, smooth the edges, control the outcome. Mistakes could be hidden, accidents erased, consequences avoided. In her world, accountability was optional. But that night, The rain, the road, the shape in the headlights had shattered that belief. She stood in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection. For the first time in years, she felt a disconnect between who she was and who she had always believed herself to be. Her eyes looked tired, hollow. A tremor ran through her hands. The carefully maintained mask of control seemed fragile, as if it could crumble with a single breath. Everywhere she looked, reminders of her life surrounded her, gleaming floors, expensive furniture, art on the walls. Yet none of it brought comfort. None of it could shield her from what she had done. The crash replayed in her mind, the sound, the shape, the feeling of fear. She had left something behind, something that refused to stay buried, no matter how fast she had driven away. At work, her composure began to falter. The meetings that once energized her now felt distant, hollow, as if she were watching herself from the outside. Her thoughts wandered, returning obsessively to the accident. Every smile, every handshake felt meaningless. She could buy almost anything, yet she could not buy her peace of mind. The woman who had mastered power and influence was suddenly powerless against herself. The life she had built, wealth, luxury, status, was meaningless compared to the weight pressing on her conscience. She realized painfully that control could not protect her from the truth. That morning she felt it clearly. Money, privilege, and power could not erase what she had done. They could not fix what had happened on that lonely, rain-soaked road. And for the first time, she understood how truly empty her life had been, how fragile her carefully constructed walls were, and how long she had avoided the consequences of her own actions. The wealth that once made her untouchable now felt like a cage. She could no longer escape the truth she had run from, and the ghost of the road had followed her home, quietly waiting for the walls of her life to crumble. Sleep abandoned her. The night stretched long and merciless, filled with shadows and whispers only she seemed to notice. When she finally closed her eyes, the road returned, the rain, the headlights, and the dark shape she had left behind. Sometimes it seemed to move just beyond her vision, just at the edge of her mind. Every time she blinked, it was gone, replaced by the emptiness of her ceiling or the sterile walls of her bedroom. She woke with her heart pounding, sheets damp with sweat, hands trembling. The city outside her windows was silent and calm, but inside her mind, a storm raged that no luxury could soothe. She tried to tell herself it was imagination, that the mind could play tricks after trauma. But deep down she knew the truth. Something from that night had followed her home, and it was not content to stay hidden. During the day, the world betrayed her in small, unsettling ways. In the glass of her office windows, she thought she saw a dark figure lingering just behind her. Shadows in the corners of hallways seemed to stretch unnaturally, and sometimes in mirrors, she glimpsed a shape she could not identify, there and then gone as if dissolving before her eyes. Her reflection became something she no longer recognized. Her nerves frayed quickly. Even in crowded rooms she felt alone and watched. The footsteps she heard behind her in empty hallways made her heart jump. Doors closing too sharply, the hum of a distant car engine, the faint scuff of shoes on a marble floor, all became warnings, signs she could not ignore. She tried to fight the fear with distraction. Meetings, charity events, social calls, shopping trips, all became frantic attempts to occupy her mind, to drown out the presence that lingered. She spent money as if it could buy her peace, giving large sums to causes that had never mattered to her before. But even generosity could not silence the whispers in her mind. Then came the small reminders, impossible to explain away. A smear of something dark appeared on her car bumper, though it had been cleaned repeatedly. An object she didn't recognize, twisted in shape, appeared in her house. A fragment of metal, bent and blackened, almost like a shadow had left it behind. No matter how often she removed it, it returned. The feeling of being followed grew heavier, more insistent. Every step outside, every quiet corner in her home, every glance in reflective glass brought the same certainty. She was not alone. And the guilt, once distant and manageable, began to gnaw at her relentlessly. It grew sharp and insistent, an ache that money, power, and denial could not soothe. The woman who had lived by control now realized she had none. Not over what had happened, not over what was coming, and not over herself. The signs she had tried to dismiss were now impossible to ignore. Something or someone demanded her attention. And the quiet, persistent knowledge in the pit of her stomach whispered a truth she could not yet face aloud. She had run from a crime she could not undo. The line between reality and imagination blurred. She did not know if the dark shapes in her mirrors were real or the projections of her own mind. She only knew one thing for certain. The accident had left a mark far deeper than the road or the rain. It had left a mark on her soul. And that mark refused to stay hidden. The rain had stopped, but the road was no less ominous. Its asphalt glistened faintly under the pale light of a waning moon, winding through empty fields with no one to guide her but her own fear. She drove slowly this time, careful not to rush. Every turn, every shadow at the edge of the headlights, reminded her of that night, the thud, the shape, the terrible certainty she had chosen to ignore. 4 hours she had wrestled with herself, trying to convince herself that returning was a mistake. She had left it behind. Let it stay there. But something deeper, something she could not name, pushed her forward. She needed to know. She needed to face the truth. When she finally stopped, she stepped out of her car, boots sinking slightly into the soft, damp ground. The road stretched ahead, quiet and unbroken. The air smelled of earth and rain, clean but heavy, as though it carried the weight of every secret it had ever held. She scanned the ground carefully. At first it appeared ordinary, wet, smooth asphalt with scattered leaves. But then she noticed subtle disturbances in the dirt near the edge of the road. Footprints, uneven patches of grass flattened as though something had struggled there. A cold knot of fear formed in her stomach. She paused, unsure whether to continue. Her hands shook slightly, cold from the night air, but her heart beat even faster from anticipation. This was the moment when denial would either hold or shatter. Nearby, a small shop stood open, its yellow light spilling onto the road. She approached cautiously. The owner, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, watched her closely as she asked about the road. "They say people vanish here," he said quietly, as if speaking too loudly might draw them out of hiding. "Strangers walk at night, sometimes never come back. Most folks avoid it. Nothing good happens here after dark." She swallowed, trying to keep her voice steady. "Have you ever seen anyone walking alone?" The man hesitated. "A few. A young man mostly. Quiet. Poor. Walks these roads like he belongs to the shadows. Hardly anyone notices him. Hardly anyone cares." A chill ran down her spine. Her denial trembled and cracked. Something she had told herself for weeks, the comforting lie that it was just a dog, was no longer convincing. The road had stories. People noticed things. Things that vanished. Things that mattered. She traced her eyes over the spot where the ground had been disturbed. The imprint left by whatever had fallen there whispered of human weight, human struggle. The shape of it lingered in her mind like an echo, sharper and clearer with every step she took. Her thoughts spun wildly. What if it wasn't a dog? What if I left someone behind? She stepped back, heart hammering. For the first time, fear mingled with regret. For the first time, she understood that some truths could not be buried under distance, wealth, or distraction. The road held secrets. And now it had claimed her attention. She could not ignore it any longer. A small, involuntary shiver ran through her as the wind swept across the road. She realized she had come seeking closure, but what she found was a mirror to her own conscience. The world would not let her forget, not now, not ever. Her carefully maintained walls of denial had begun to crumble, and the truth she had fled from all these nights pressed forward, insistent, heavy, and undeniable. The world she lived in, the world of polished floors, warm rooms, and endless comfort, had nothing in common with the world he had walked through. He woke before dawn as he always did, to the faint chill of a room that had never felt fully like a home. The walls were cracked, the roof patched with old sheets, and the floor always cold against his bare feet. He had little. Too little, some would have said, and yet he carried within him something far greater than gold could buy: resilience, kindness, and the quiet courage to keep moving forward despite the world's indifference. Every day was a struggle. A search for food, for warmth, for a place to rest without judgment. He worked odd jobs, carrying crates, sweeping streets, running errands no one else wanted. People rarely noticed him, and when they did, they often ignored him. He was invisible to those with comfort, easy to dismiss, easy to forget. Yet despite the harshness of life, he gave what he could. He shared the little he had with children who cried in the streets. He offered a coat to someone shivering at a corner. He smiled at the elderly woman who sold bread near the market, her hands trembling with age, and listened when she spoke of days long gone. In a world that had turned its face away, he remained human. Meanwhile, the woman who had hit him had spent the same hours in warmth and abundance. She sipped coffee in a high-rise apartment, surrounded by the smell of fresh flowers, polished wood, and the soft hum of machines that did everything for her. She had no need to struggle, no need to beg, no need to worry about what tomorrow might bring. Her life had been built on convenience and control. His life existed in the small gaps left by others' neglect. And yet, on that road, their worlds collided. She had seen him, though she had convinced herself it was an animal, A dog, something easy to dismiss. But it had not been easy. He had existed. He had felt pain, fear, and confusion. He had a story. And she had ignored it, chosen to flee instead. His life was not remarkable in the eyes of the world. It had no headlines, no grand achievements, no boardroom victories. But it had meaning. Each act of kindness, each struggle survived, each day endured, was a triumph of humanity against a world that refused to see him. Now, in her mind, images began to haunt her. The rain-soaked road, the way he had fallen, the silent plea she had refused to witness. She could no longer pretend that it was nothing. The contrast between their lives, the ease she enjoyed and the hardship he endured, cut her like a blade. He had been one of the invisible ones, and she had passed through his world without noticing. And in that failure, the weight of her guilt began to settle like a stone in her chest. The thought of him did not fade with the morning. His life, once invisible, now demanded recognition. And she understood, with a clarity that was almost unbearable, that the luxury she had relied upon for protection could not shield her from the consequences of ignoring another human being. The road had revealed a truth she could no longer avoid. Some lives are easily forgotten by society, but no one can escape the memory of the harm they have caused. He had been real. He had suffered. And she had driven away, leaving it all behind. Her wealth, her comfort, her life of control, all of it could not reach across the distance to undo what had been done. And for the first time she understood the cost of indifference. The truth hit her like a second impact, sudden, crushing, and impossible to ignore. It began with a faint rumor at first. A missing person report, a brief mention in a local newspaper she did not usually read. A young man, poor, often seen walking alone along the same stretch of road. No family nearby, no one to speak loudly on his behalf. Just a name on a list, almost invisible, almost meaningless. But then the details began to align. The timing, the location, the description of the figure. Everything she had pushed away in her mind, the sound, the shape, the fear on that rainy night, suddenly returned with painful clarity. She could not deny it anymore. It had not been a dog. It had been him. The weight of understanding settled on her chest like iron. Her knees went weak, and the car she had driven away in so confidently suddenly felt like a cage, a coffin for her freedom. She sank onto the seat, head in her hands, and the world narrowed until it consisted of only that one unbearable truth. Her heart hammered. Her breaths came in short, ragged bursts. She tried to speak, tried to tell herself it was a mistake, that there must be some error, some misalignment of facts. But the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses had spoken. The marks on the road had been noted. Footage, descriptions, the trail of his life that had ended on that stretch of asphalt, all pointed to one unbearable conclusion. She had left him behind. Alive, vulnerable, human. And she had chosen to drive away. The realization twisted her stomach and hollowed her chest. Every excuse she had clung to, every lie she had told herself in those first frantic moments, crumbled to dust. Her wealth, her privilege, her carefully constructed world of control, none of it mattered. None of it could protect her from the truth. Images flashed before her eyes, the rain pouring over the road, the headlights illuminating the figure just long enough for her to see, but not long enough for her to act. The thud, the shape, the silence, and then the retreat, the decision to flee. She felt herself breaking. Not physically but inside, where the heart beats and the conscience waits. Tears came unbidden, hot and bitter. She had always avoided facing the consequences of her actions, hiding behind money, influence, and fear. But there was no hiding now. No walls tall enough, no doors secure enough. The world had demanded acknowledgement, and it had arrived. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she stared at the evidence before her. She could no longer separate herself from what had happened. She had been a driver, a bystander, a person with choices, and she had chosen the wrong path. For the first time, she understood the true weight of her freedom and her privilege. They had enabled her to walk away from responsibility, but they could not erase the cost. The reality of what she had done burned through her like fire. The guilt, once distant and vague, now consumed her completely. She felt it in every nerve, every heartbeat, every thought. She had taken part in ending a life, and no amount of money, no influence, no denial could bring it back. In that moment she collapsed, not onto a bed, not into the arms of anyone, but into herself. The life she had built, the persona she had perfected, all of it felt meaningless. She had survived. He had not. And the road, the rain, the headlights, all of it replayed endlessly in her mind, a haunting loop that would not allow her to rest. She could no longer pretend. She could no longer escape. The horror of her choice had found her, and there would be no forgetting it. Her wealth, her power, her carefully constructed life, all were useless against the truth. She had done this, and now she would have to live with it. Guilt became her constant companion, following her like a shadow she could never escape. She woke each morning feeling as if the night had never ended. Her sheets were twisted and damp, her pillows soaked with sweat, her mind already racing before the day began. She could not eat. She could not focus. She wandered through her house like a ghost, touching expensive furniture, polished floors, and framed portraits, everything that once symbolized control and power, but all of it now felt hollow, meaningless. Even her carefully structured routines offered no relief. Meetings, phone calls, appearances at charity events, all blurred into one monotonous haze of obligations she could no longer care about. Her work, once a source of pride and distraction, now seemed trivial against the weight pressing in her chest. The world went on around her, oblivious, while she carried the unbearable knowledge of what she had done. At first she thought she could outrun it. She busied herself, shopping for things she did not need, donating to causes she had once ignored, filling every silence with noise. But the guilt was insistent. It slipped past every defense she built. No amount of distraction could drown it. And then the shadows came. At first she thought it was her imagination. A movement in the corner of a room, a figure reflected in the mirror that vanished when she looked directly. The faint sound of footsteps echoing down empty hallways, though no one was there. Small, inexplicable touches, a draft of cold air, the brush of something against her arm, made her jump and clutch at her chest. Every dark reflection became a reminder of him. Every empty hallway whispered his absence. She began to see him in fleeting glimpses, a shadow in the corner, a shape in the periphery, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. It was not violent, not loud, but persistent. Relentless. Her mind, once sharp and controlled, frayed at the edges. Simple tasks felt impossible. Emails went unanswered. Calls were ignored. Even her husband noticed the distance, the hollow look in her eyes, the tremor in her hands when she reached for a cup or a pen. At night she could not sleep. The road returned. The rain returned. The headlights illuminated the figure she had fled, and she relived the moment over and over, feeling the impact, hearing the thud, and tasting the metallic sting of fear and shame. She tried to speak to herself, to explain away what had happened, to tell herself she had done nothing wrong. But the words rang hollow. She had fled. She had ignored the truth. She had walked away from a life she could not restore. And now, every part of her world reminded her that she could not undo it. Her wealth, her power, her privilege, they were useless. No diamond, no title, no luxury could erase the presence that haunted her. The guilt had become a living thing, shaping her days and nights. It whispered in the quiet moments, pressed on her chest while she moved, made her heart pound when she thought she was alone. Every reflection, every shadow, every fleeting figure reminded her that she had failed, not just as a human being but as a witness to life. She felt herself unraveling completely. The life she had built with precision and care, the walls of control and indifference, were crumbling from the inside. She had tried to escape her conscience, but it had found her. It had always been there, waiting, patient, relentless. And now she knew she would never be free until she faced what she had done. The haunting presence was no longer subtle. It pressed close. It filled the rooms. It lingered in every glance, every reflection, every sound. She could feel it in her chest, in her arms, in the trembling of her hands. It was as if the weight of the road, the rain, and the life she had struck had followed her home, waiting for her to accept it, waiting for her to confront it. She shivered in the silence, realizing that running, denying, hiding, none of it mattered. She had no choice but to face the truth, no matter how unbearable it might be. The weight of guilt was absolute, and it would not release her until she took responsibility for what she had done. And in that moment she understood something she had never known in all her years of wealth and control, that punishment can come from within, and that true horror is living with the knowledge of what you cannot undo. She could no longer hide from what she had done. The guilt that had haunted her nights now pressed her into action. She sought out the people connected to the young man she had hit, the life she had so carelessly dismissed. Her first steps were hesitant. She walked into small, dimly lit homes and modest neighborhoods she had never noticed before, where poverty was not news but everyday reality. Children played barefoot in dusty streets. Laundry hung on lines between sagging houses. Men and women worked tirelessly to survive, carrying burdens no one acknowledged. Here she was not the woman of wealth and influence. Here she was just a stranger, a visitor, and nothing more. She met people who had known him, neighbors, friends, co-workers. Each encounter was like a shard of glass in her chest. They spoke of him with quiet pride and deep sorrow, describing his kindness, his humor, his quiet courage in a world that had repeatedly ignored him. They recounted the small acts of generosity he had offered, sharing a loaf of bread, giving warm words to those who had none, helping an elderly neighbor carry firewood. Their voices broke her. She had never considered the richness of his life, the humanity she had denied in that moment of panic and fear. His life had mattered, and she had been blind to it. She tried to explain at first in broken, stumbling words. But they did not need her excuses. They did not need her money. They needed acknowledgement, attention, the recognition that their loss had not gone unseen. Her attempts at restitution began small. A promise to help his family, to support those he had cared for, to ensure that the community he had been a part of was not left forgotten. She gave quietly, not for praise, not for recognition, but because she could not live with the silence any longer. Still, forgiveness seemed impossible. The people she tried to help did not immediately trust her. How could they? She had been absent when it mattered most, invisible when their world collapsed, and her presence now was a fragile, late acknowledgement of responsibility. She began to feel, acutely, the weight of every life she had ignored, every voice she had overlooked. She realized that the young man had been more than a victim. He was a mirror reflecting not just the injustice of society, but the failures in herself. Every visit, every conversation, every witness she met made her understand the scale of her neglect. She could not undo the past. She could not bring him back. But she could bear witness and in that act perhaps begin to make amends. Each step she took into this unfamiliar world forced her to confront her own indifference. She saw how easily people like him were dismissed, forgotten, erased. And she understood, painfully, that she had contributed to that erasure by fleeing, by hiding behind wealth and fear. Her acts of restitution were imperfect and small, but they were honest. She visited the places he had frequented, spoke to those he had helped, and offered assistance that required nothing in return. It was not a return to peace, but a recognition of what had been lost, a fragile acknowledgement of life where she had once seen only an obstacle, a shape in the night. And slowly, as she continued, she began to feel something she had never felt in her controlled, privileged life: connection, responsibility, the painful, transformative weight of empathy. The line between justice and mercy blurred. She could not undo the harm, but she could honor it. She could listen, bear witness, and ensure that his life was remembered, even if she had failed to protect it. For the first time she saw her own life reflected in his absence, how easily one could be forgotten, dismissed, and erased. And she began to understand that to face the forgotten was not just to help them, but to face herself, the truth of her choices, and the consequences she had long avoided. The haunting presence she had felt for weeks, silent, insistent, unyielding, softened, not entirely gone but reshaped. It was no longer just guilt. It was a guide, pointing her toward accountability, toward acts that mattered, toward the slow, painful path of redemption. The walls of her carefully constructed world were closing in. The whispers she had hoped were only in her mind now had names and faces. Friends and colleagues began asking questions, casual at first, then pointed. Rumors slipped into the gossiping circuits of the city, faint but persistent. A missing person. A young man. The road. The timing. The details were small, scattered, but enough to make her pulse quicken every time someone spoke near her. She could no longer ignore it. The pressure built from the outside and the inside simultaneously. Society's eyes were watching, though perhaps not consciously. Still, she felt their gaze, heavy and unforgiving. And inside her, guilt pressed relentlessly against every thought. Sleep had fled entirely. Food barely touched her lips. Every mirror, every reflective surface, every shadow reminded her that she had done something irreversible. She began to understand that the choice she had avoided, the choice she had postponed out of fear, could no longer be delayed. She could confess. She could tell the truth, step into the light and face the consequences. Admit her failure, her panic, her cowardice. But the price was enormous. Reputation, status, influence, all the things she had built her life upon, would crumble. People would judge her harshly, not just for the accident, but for the deliberate choice to leave him behind. She would be exposed as flawed, human, vulnerable in ways she had spent decades hiding. Or she could continue to hide. Pretend, deny, preserve appearances. She could keep the story buried, rely on her wealth, her connections, her social power to keep the truth from spreading. She could avoid the immediate pain, the humiliation, the judgment, but at what cost? The weight in her chest, the relentless presence she had felt since that night, would never leave. The haunting would grow stronger, sharper, more impossible to ignore. Each day the internal battle became unbearable. One side of her mind pleaded for self-preservation, whispered that she had already survived, that the world would forgive her if no one knew. The other side, quieter but relentless, demanded accountability, justice, acknowledgement. That voice was growing, and it would not stop until she acted. Every corner of her life had become a battlefield. Meetings she once dominated now felt impossible. Every smile felt forced, every word a lie. The eyes of her employees, her friends, even strangers in the street seemed to see right through her, to the truth she wanted to bury. And then came the confrontation. Not direct, not violent, but subtle and absolute. A neighbor, a witness, someone who had seen the car near the road on the night of the accident. A brief question, almost casual. "Did you see anyone? Was someone there?" That single sentence, innocent in tone, struck her with the force of revelation. The walls she had built with wealth and influence could not withstand a simple human question. The moral crossroads had arrived. She could continue to run or she could stop. She could cling to her life of appearances, or she could surrender to the truth. She could protect her reputation, or she could honor the life she had harmed. She could keep her freedom, or she could face the consequences she had long avoided. Her chest ached. Her head pounded. Her hands trembled. She felt the weight of every choice, every privilege, every act of avoidance pressing down upon her. And in that moment, clarity emerged. The cost of confession would be high, social ruin, judgment, shame, but the cost of silence would be worse. It would be the endless gnawing of guilt, the certainty that she had failed in the one thing that mattered, recognizing and taking responsibility for a life she had harmed. She realized she had only two paths. One led to exposure, pain, and accountability. The other led to a slow, suffocating torment that no wealth, no comfort, no influence could ever alleviate. And for the first time since that rainy night on the road, she understood that living with lies was a fate far crueler than any external punishment. The choice pressed down on her like the weight of the road itself. She could feel the presence of the one she had hit lingering near her, not accusing but patient, demanding. The truth was waiting, relentless and unwavering, and she had no choice but to meet it. She inhaled sharply, her breath trembling, and for the first time considered saying the words aloud. The morning she chose to act, the air felt heavier than usual, charged with a tension that seemed to pulse around her. Every step toward the truth felt like a battle against herself. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone, wrote letters, and arranged meetings she had long avoided. The words she would speak, the truth she would reveal, had the weight of 1,000 nights spent in guilt pressing down on her chest. She went first to the family of the young man, the one whose life had been taken on that rain-slicked road. The initial meetings were quiet, tense. Eyes that had seen grief, eyes that had mourned silently for a life dismissed, studied her cautiously. She spoke haltingly at first, confessing everything, the night, the road, the fear, the flight. Every word felt like a wound opening in her chest, but she forced them out. Tears came freely, uncontrolled, as she described what she had done, the panic that had overtaken her, and the unbearable weight of guilt she had carried alone. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not attempt to explain herself away with wealth or status. She offered only acknowledgement, honesty, and the first steps toward restitution. It was not easy. The family listened in silence, their faces calm but unreadable. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Some cried. Some remained quiet, perhaps judging, perhaps waiting to see if her words carried truth or just fear. And in that silence she understood. Redemption would not be given freely. It would not be simple. It would be earned painstakingly through courage, acknowledgement, and action. Next, she approached the community, the people who had known him, who had witnessed his kindness, who had felt the subtle absence of his presence since that night. She offered support where it was needed, assistance where she could help, but always quietly, never seeking praise. Every gesture, every small act, was an acknowledgement of what she had failed to do before. For the first time in her life, she understood that actions mattered more than appearances. Wealth could not repair what had been broken. Power could not erase a life taken too soon. Only accountability, humility, and effort could begin to balance the scales. And slowly, the presence that had haunted her nights began to change. No longer a shadow pressing relentlessly, it became a guide, a quiet reminder that while she could not undo the past, she could act in the present. Each confession, each small act of restitution, eased the weight pressing on her, though never entirely. She faced judgment, both external and internal. Colleagues whispered. Friends wondered. Society cast a wary eye. She lost status, influence, and comfort. But she gained something that had been absent all her life: a sense of responsibility, a connection to the world, and a recognition of the humanity she had once ignored. Redemption was painful, and it was incomplete. She could not bring him back. She could not erase the fear, the suffering, or the consequences of that night. But she could honor his life, bear witness to what had happened, and change the way she lived going forward. As she left each meeting, each home, each conversation, she felt herself growing, not free from guilt, but free to act despite it. The road no longer followed her as a shadow of horror, but as a reminder of responsibility. It was a guide for living, not just a memory of fear. For the first time, she realized that redemption was not a reward. It was a process, a choice made repeatedly in small, painful steps. And she was willing to take them. Time passed, slow and deliberate, marking the changes that she could no longer deny. The world she had once controlled with wealth, charm, and influence had shifted, leaving her with a life smaller, quieter, and yet more honest. She no longer moved through spaces as if the air belonged to her. She walked humbly, acutely aware of every step she took, and every action she made carried weight. Her social standing had diminished. Friends who had once flattered her for her power now kept their distance. Invitations to exclusive gatherings dwindled, and whispers of her past mistakes followed her wherever she went. She could no longer hide behind appearances. She had chosen truth over reputation, and society had responded with judgment. But with the loss of comfort came something she had never known: clarity. She began to live intentionally, making choices that reflected responsibility rather than self-interest. Every interaction, every decision, was guided by a consciousness of consequence, a sense of moral weight she had long ignored. Her work shifted as well. No longer seeking only profit or prestige, she devoted herself to causes that mattered, causes that honored the life she had once dismissed. She funded local initiatives, supported families struggling to survive, and created programs for those whose voices had been overlooked. Her donations were no longer a shield against guilt but a bridge to understanding and connection. The memory of the young man she had hit became a guiding presence. She could not forget him, nor would she try. Instead, she allowed his life to inform hers, to remind her that every human being mattered, that every choice carried weight, and that the lives of the marginalized were as important as her own. Her personal life, too, changed. The distance in her marriage could no longer be ignored. She confronted the emptiness she had once disguised with social appearances. Conversations became honest, painful, and transformative. She recognized that love, empathy, and accountability were not commodities to be bought. They were cultivated, nurtured, and earned through effort and sincerity. Even her nights, once haunted by guilt and shadows, softened over time. The relentless presence that had stalked her through mirrors and empty hallways was replaced by a quiet reminder of responsibility. It no longer demanded terror, it demanded vigilance, conscience, and reflection. The road she had feared, the scene of her darkest moment, was no longer a place of horror but a place of memory and learning. She returned occasionally, not to relive the accident, but to acknowledge it, to honor the life she had taken for granted, and to remind herself of the fragility of existence. Her world had been permanently altered. Comfort, privilege, and status had been stripped away, leaving a life that felt raw, uncertain, and profoundly real. But in its place, she found meaning, accountability, and a connection to humanity she had never experienced before. She had been forced to confront her mistakes, endure the consequences, and rebuild her life around truth rather than appearances. And though the path was difficult, though the scars of guilt would never fully fade, she had learned the value of responsibility, the cost of indifference, and the power of redemption. In a world that had once been defined by her wealth, she had found a life defined by conscience. And for the first time in decades, she felt awake, fully present, and capable of living with the choices she had made, both the terrible and the redemptive. The world had changed, and so had she. She returned to the road one last time, the same winding path slick with rain as it had been that night, though the years had passed and the world had changed around it. The moon hung pale in the sky, casting long, quiet shadows across the asphalt. She parked her car at the side, stepped out, and simply stood, letting the wind and silence reach into the corners of her memory. For decades she had believed she had hit only a dog, an unfortunate, insignificant creature. That lie had protected her for a brief, fleeting moment. But now she knew the truth was far heavier. That night, she had hit not just a human being, not just a life unseen, but a reflection of herself. The humanity she had ignored, the empathy she had refused, the conscience she had buried beneath wealth and privilege. The road had been a mirror, and the impact had shattered more than a single life. It had shattered the illusion that comfort, status, and power could protect her from moral responsibility. Every step she had taken since, the fear, the guilt, the sleepless nights, the acts of restitution, had been a slow, painful confrontation with herself. She looked down at the asphalt, imagining the young man she had struck, imagining the life she had disrupted, and then, finally, imagining the part of herself that had fled in panic that night. It was a strange, painful clarity. She had collided with more than flesh and bone. She had collided with conscience, with morality, with the raw truth of existence itself. Her redemption had not erased the past. It had not brought back what was lost. But it had allowed her to face herself fully, to live with awareness, and to act with integrity where once she had acted only in fear and self-interest. The haunting presence that had tormented her nights had faded, not gone entirely, but transformed into a quiet guide, a reminder that life demanded acknowledgement, courage, and conscience. She took a deep breath and felt something shift. The road was no longer just a place of horror. It was a teacher, a witness, a space where truth could not be ignored. And she understood at last that what had truly been hit that night was not just another life. It was her own soul, her own humanity, and the opportunity to become someone capable of responsibility, empathy, and redemption. She turned away from the road, no longer fleeing, no longer denying. Her steps were steady now, measured, conscious. The world she entered would never be the same, and neither would she. And for the first time in her life, she felt the quiet weight of accountability not as punishment, but as awakening. What she had hit that night was not simply a body in the rain. It was the part of herself that had refused to see, to care, to act. And in facing that truth, she had finally begun to live. The road remained behind her, still winding and dark, but no longer haunted, because she had been changed. And that was enough.